this way, and then up this way, and we're going to do this. And then we're going to come back in, and we're going to cut in along the deltoid. Then each of these folds that expands out will eventually run into these lines. The first thing we do, though, before we find the pipe folds, we find the tension lines of each of the folds, or we try to describe them to the best of our abilities. And each of these should be elliptical. They go around the shirt. They go around. They go around the waist. They go around it.
¿Se me escucha ahora?
From here,
¿Sí?
they're going around. They're going around.
Pero se me ha chingado todo. Ahora lo escucho por aquí.
All through here. These separate like this, but they're going around, around, around.
Es que mira que hace estas cosas en
These
directo.
drop downward. There's a pattern to them, and then these go around. Over here, these are doing the same thing. They're kind of going around, and then we have.
Voy a cerrar el soundtrack y lo abro de nuevo.
We run into a couple here.
Este lo pongo aquí.
This in the middle.
Paso el cable por atrás.
And these drop down.
Bueno, ya por lo menos se me está escuchando.
Patterns.
Bien. Miércoles. Miércoles de ponerle ropa a nuestro personaje.
Drops.
Miércoles de vestir bien.
This connects this way. This has a little fold
GG.
this way. But these folds,
Miércoles de
if you don't
ropita.
read them properly, notice how this is an edge here and this is an edge going this way. It's two different pipe
No se está
rings.
cargando. Bueno,
So we don't want
tampoco pasa
to
nada.
do all of this stuff first. We want to be really simple.
Envío la señal.
There's something going
Opa.
around this way. There's
Duplicar
something going around
pantalla.
this way.
Tacatán.
This terminates somewhere along here, and it's the shape of the leg that we rested up against. So for the most part, we have
Aquí quiero la
all of
pantalla.
the design in 2 dimensions.
Hasta abajo.
Right? Because these are all curves, they're arcs, but are they
Está
really
bien
dimensional? Well,
colocada.
they become dimensional once we apply other attributes to them that really make them fleshed out
Aquí.
and feel that way. All right, then we zoom in.
Venga, hoy
The next
vamos
detail.
al lío con aprender. Vamos a investigar un poco
Okay, so
cómo
our game
funciona,
plan, this is how we're going
cómo
to go
funciona la
about
ropa.
painting what we do.
Cómo ponerle ropa a nuestro personaje.
What I'd like you to start off with for this week are references that are mostly in
Muy chula
jeans
esta
and long
foto. ¿Me
sleeve
la puedo traer
shirts,
para acá?
long sleeve t-shirts, long sleeve sweaters, sweatshirts or whatever, but jeans and t-shirts for the most part. I want you to stick with stuff
Porque
that's close
parece
to
que
the
no.
body. It's going to be a little easier for us to start here and
Lo voy a hacer con el navegador, que supongo que será
dresses
mejor.
and capes and things that are very large and that don't necessarily strap down to the body completely. This is going to be the starting point for whether it's male or female. Make sure that you pick this
Navegación
kind of
privada.
combination.
Mejor,
And then
por si acaso.
we're going to start with the armature,
A ver.
just like you
Y aquí en
done
Pinterest.
figure construction. If you didn't take figure construction, then this is a step
Que sí, que acepto.
that
Me deje.
we are looking for in the drawing. The first
Vamos
step
allá.
is to draw the core of the body.
Pero y
The core of the
Pinterest.
body is done in a pillow.
No quiero abrir en
body shape
Pinterest.
with the sides bent at the rib cage.
Me gustaría utilizarlo
Represent
sin
the acromion
No se puede
processes
utilizar
and the great
sin
trochanters. And then you
50,
have a
tío.
center line down the middle of the figure. And that center line down the middle of the figure splits your figure between the left side and the right side.
Bueno,
Also
bueno, bueno,
starts
bueno,
if
pues
it
nada.
helps you find
Busco
your
normal.
neck as well as the base of the torso. So our center line is something like this. The center line is moving closer to the left side on the bottom and is closer to the middle at the top. All right, arms are simple cylinders. If they are not bent, don't separate them into segments. The same with the legs. If the legs are not bent, don't make them into two
Madre
parts.
mía.
That doesn't make any sense at all. Make it into one simple shape. The reason for doing that is there's no need for division of the shapes if it's in a straight line. If it's in a straight line, then everything is lined up together regardless. So that's just an extra step that's unnecessary to take.
Foto de
to get the
referencia.
drawing finished. The
En
ellipses
imágenes.
down here represent where in the
Uno que tenga
torso
ropa.
the legs are beginning, because remember that leg muscles begin at the top of the hips, and so we reflect on the size of the legs and the position of the legs based on the size of the pelvis within the
Malnudity.
torso. And do remember that the pelvis takes up 2/3 the height, where the rib cage is one solid unit within this pillow shape. So it's 2/3 unit or 1 unit, and the 1 unit is the rib cage. And that's basically what we're designing the pillow shape for, to recognize the size of the rib cage in comparison to the rest of the torso.
Claro. Quizá
All right, so the knee ends somewhere right around
podría
here.
solucionarlo buscando
Just drawing 2 parallel or close to parallel lines right now, remembering that all the
moda,
lines
¿no?
is flexion.
Spring fashion.
For any cylinder that's on the bottom.
Por ejemplo.
And then the door wedge shapes for the feet. This leg comes out to somewhere about right here. It's foreshortened, so it's not as long. And then it goes back behind.
Fashion photography.
And then we
Vamos a ver. Ah, claro, aquí tengo
and finally this arm, which is
ropa y
extended
pliegue
out
para
past the
aburrir.
knee and then brought back towards the face. Now the last thing I need to do here in this armature
Por ejemplo,
is
vamos a
develop
coger
a
esta
sense of volume
otra
in
capa.
all of the feature shapes, and that sense of volume comes from the elliptical drawing.
Y vamos a analizar.
Right. So when we put ellipses around these cylinders, the mind can now
Primero
perceive the
voy a
cylinder
ver
as a
en
form.
qué de esto estoy.
This is just a box, but you
bueno.
change the box, the ends of the box, and somewhere within the center of the box
Tutti
into
round.
something that has a rounded line over it. All of a sudden you have a cylinder instead of a box. Alright, so once this has been established, I think the only other thing I want to do here is just to make sure that the head size remains proper. I'm going to go ahead and flesh out the skull. Side plane over here. Front plane
Brazo,
over here. Chin. And that's just
mano,
for recognizable volume. Get rid of all the stray lines that no longer need to be in the picture.
cuello.
Any ellipses or templates that were misconstrued or designed incorrectly, those should go away too. We don't want a lot of noise in the picture by the time we're done. The last thing I do is I take my eraser
pierna viene
and
por
I
aquí.
lightly knock it back about 20%, and then I'm going to put a white layer
Y luego
over
por
the top
acá.
of this to knock it back even further. And that's just so the lines aren't so aggressive.
El pie de punta, así, claro, porque esto es súper cómodo, ¿sabes? No, apenas se te encoge el gemelo haciendo esto. Las poses de moda es que son muy graciosas.
On the white layer, I'm going to go back and crop out the photograph so we can actually see it getting back above. Now, the first lines that architecturally that I want to develop here are the cut lines of the clothing. I want to make it very clear
Y en...
where the cuffs...
realmente. Vamos a ver. Aquí pelo, pelo, pelo.
Where the cuff
Pelo,
lines
pelo, pelo,
are,
pelo.
where the collar line
Ojo.
is. Well, the collar line is a bit confusing because it's squeezed together, but he still has a neck that's the same size. If you squeeze your shoulders, your neck is not going to shrink.
Y diréis, Pedro, pero qué bruto eres, por favor, bájale a eso el tamaño que estás haciéndolo con un rotulado de punta gorda. Es la idea. ¿Pero por qué? Porque si no, me pierdo en los detalles. Y tú te pierdes en los detalles también. Este tipo de cosas hay que hacerlas con punta gorda. Te obligas a ir a lo principal, a los detalles principales. Y no intentas hacerlo todo. No hace falta hacer todos los detallitos.
right, and then from there, I'm going to develop the clothing over the body, and I'm going to make very certain that I'm looking at the extensions of all the folds, and that's roughly how large I'm going to drop in the material into the picture. So over here, the material for the most part is along the side of the arm, so I'm going to keep it like that. That little anomalous shape I'm going to add later.
Aquí
But
esto
on the
está un
other
poco
side,
liado.
there's several
Voy a
folds that stick out.
borrarlo para
I want to make
rehacerlo un
sure
poco.
that I compensate for that I pull the
Y
material
tenemos
away
aquí
from the body.
el
And I'm going to do the same
cuello.
thing down here and over here.
Aquí tenemos en esta
I
dirección
can see that the
los
material
pliegues.
sticks off of
En
his
esta
torso,
dirección los
and I'm going to
pliegues.
make all of the material do that.
Aquí el
Then
otro
I'll cut
cuello
back into
va
it.
así.
This arm over here is a bit stressed because his arm is
Esto lo tiene cerrado.
bent. The material is going to be a little bit tighter to his torso.
Vale, ahora que tengo la base hecha,
But I'm going to still around the elbow.
sí que voy a hacer un en otra capa con otro color y con esto más finito. Voy a analizar un poco cómo funciona la ropa. Tenemos aquí un punto de contacto. Aquí es donde sobresale más, en este caso el hombro. El hombro sobresale aquí y eso crea que haya pliegue desde allí en las direcciones en las que cuelga la ropa. Esta dirección, en esta dirección y en esta dirección. Aquí hay estos pliegues que son... Espérate, si yo puedo traerme esto aquí, creo que mejor. Lo voy a poner aquí al ladito, más pequeño, y esto lo puedo esconder. O sea, ¿te quieres esconder? Vamos a ver. Ay. Quiero que te escondas. Vale. Pues como iba diciendo, aquí tenemos estos pliegues que van en esta dirección. Porque de este punto, desde el hombro y de toda esta zona, pero sobre todo aquí, pende toda la tela, está colgando de ahí. Entonces aquí tenemos esto, aquí tenemos un pliegue, o sea, tenemos el dobladillo este. Y aquí cuelga un poco hacia abajo. Aquí tenemos esto doblado también.
Laces come down to about right here, and that's how you block in the shoe.
Y aquí los pliegues se hacen en esta dirección porque está como contorsionando. Bueno, aquí llega el pelo. Los cuellos hacen esta forma. Tenemos por aquí los botones. Y esto va en esta dirección. La torsión del pantalón va en esta dirección. Y aquí, como es un pliegue, hay como un montón de arrugas porque hay un pliegue grande. Y aquí otra vez el dobladillo hecho porque bueno, aquí la clave está en los dobladillos. En este outfit, este trajecillo, esta ropilla que lleva ella, va muy soy muy de dobladillo. Me gusta dobladillear.
3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and then along the stitch line here, we have a lot of them. Center of the figure, across the pelvis, radiating, of course, through the middle of the crotch, and then out, 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 out.
En esta otra pierna tenemos aquí gran cantidad de pliegue. Aquí va la costura central.
The angled folds there. Around the knee over here.
La mano, que ya estuvimos viéndola.
Then under the armpit over here, we go this way. And then the tension point is actually at the pants line over here.
Cuatro dedos se
where the leg
ven.
is pushing into the material. That's where the
bajan
major
así.
cut line is in the cloth. So we have lines now that pretty much represent just about every fold. I'm putting some ellipses on here because you can see these small folds on both sides of the leg. Not that we need to put them in at all, but
Aquí
if I was
está el
going
punto
to,
de mayor
I now have
tensión.
designed
De todas formas,
shape
estos
on
pantalones,
design
como
marker
están
that helps me,
en tensión
understand
prácticamente
what
entero,
exactly my
porque
motivation would be when I start to draw those out.
están apretados como las tuercas
And then there's a few folds along
de un
here that
submarino,
take up,
pues
that take off in an upward fashion.
no
Just like I'm looking
muestran
here, this one
demasiadas
goes
arrugas.
this
Una
way,
aquí,
and these
donde
kind
está
of go
cogiendo
this
con la
way.
mano,
I know the
y
direction
arruga
of the arm, and I know that some of
de
these
pliegue
folds are curving around
aquí
this
arriba.
part of the cylinder, but I also want to complement
Después muestran la
the
forma del
top
gemelo.
of the arm. Remember, this is the top, and so
Y aquí
on
abajo
both sides of the body,
está bastante poco
if
mostrado,
the
pero
top is the
está
tension point, then both sides become slack
el centro.
from the tension point. And on both sides, this is where folds are going to take place. And
Y
that's
aquí se ve
basically what I'm
donde
looking
encaja
for here.
el
The
muslo
front of the
superior
arm and then
y
the back
pliegues
of
en
the
esta
arm,
dirección.
and dividing that
Porque
into
también
two
hay
spaces. These all go up to
una zona de plegado.
a balance point up along
Me estoy dando
here.
cuenta que la
Everything
cabeza
creates
se
a
la ha puesto muy para
tension
arriba, pero
point
bueno,
down over here, tension,
una estilización.
right?
Tiene más
Tension
cuello
point right here,
de la
tension
normal.
point, tension point, tension point,
No pasa nada.
tension point.
Hoy
That's a tension
estamos
point too, because the
analizando
material
la
gets
ropa.
tighter. It changes its cut line to some extent, so the tension point changes. But there's the initial design. Now, on the next phase of this, I'm just going to try my best to
Entonces,
increase this in cylinder form. So
pliegue
try to
este,
put the
pliegue
cylinders
este,
around the
vale.
lines. So now, as you can see over here in my layering stack, I have a
Bajo
new
esto.
white layer sitting above this
Y
template
creo
layer.
otra capa
And we have the template.
y con negro
We have
vamos a intentar
the
sacarla.
armature, which is somewhere in there. There it is. We have the armature. We have the template. And now we're going to do a finish layer over the top of that. Oh, and then a bunch of drawings from other stuff. Let's turn those off. Okay, so now going back up to the top of our stack here. New drawing, new layer. Okay, zooming in on one area. I'm now going to try and articulate what's going on there using everything that I've got here. So there's cloth right here. Then there's the length of the shoulder. And then the material kind of sticks off of the shoulder a little bit. Then we hit the tricep. Then the material sticks off again, right along in here. Comes around this way. And then we've got the cuff of the shirt. And then, of course, the arm underneath that. So we're not just drawing the clothing. We're drawing the whole thing interacting. So here's the arm now.
Qué grande.
Draw this down through the wrist. The turning of the tendons into the wrist bones. The folding skin across the top of the extensors. And then the fingers, the thumb group. Bring that around to the rest of the fingers. and then solve the rest of the details of the hand later. Coming back in here now, here is the majority of the sweater. There is one fold that sticks out right here, and this is going to be my first attempt at a pipe fold. So there's one, and here's the other. Now the pipe folds are going to have these rounded lines that cut over them. And I'm going to do this because I am tracking the pipe fold. I am trying to find the direction that it is traveling in. And I'm trying to find that dimensionally. It's not just well, I got a couple of ellipses and I'm good to go. They change, right? Because the arm is doing this. The ellipses
Aquí tenemos
that these pipe folds
la costura superior y hacia ahí van los pliegues.
Changing perspective
Tenemos aquí
up and over and around to the other side. That's basically what I'm
el punto en el que el hombro hace la tensión, que ahí es donde están emanando el punto de contacto hacia allá, y desde allí salen todas las líneas. Tiene que estar más sombreado.
We're going to change up the design of the folds a little bit once we render it. This is still giving us a point from which we can start everything off.
Aquí esta zona que también pliega mucho. Aquí tenemos un roto.
This comes down into the armpit.
Esta zona también pliega.
Then there's two folds
Gemelo.
right here and right here, little tiny ones. And then, of course, in the very end of it all, with the last rendered stage, we would come in here and get very specific about what is overlapping, which cylinder form is overlapping which cylinder form. These two are kind of squeezing into each other, but this one is overlapping this one is overlapping this one. It comes along through here and it overlaps all of this material, and I'll work my way along here and clean up all of those different edges.
Voy a intentar darle la tridimensionalidad bien a este pliegue.
Along here, and that's ultimately how I'm going to end up shading things in the end, which today we're not really going to shade. I mean, if you want to try it out, go ahead, but I'm not grading you on your shading. I'm actually grading you on your mapping. This is a mapping process, and I want to make it very clear that the mapping process is as solid as it can be. And for some reason, Zoom does not like working right now. There we go. Okay, so now there's a lot of subtle folds in here. There's these subtle pipe folds right along in here, and that goes up and connects with this one. And these are things that later on when I'm rendering that I will have to become aware of, because this is the link between this set of folds down here and this set of folds over here. Without that bridge between it, it's going to look a little strange. Alright, I'm going to increase my brush size again, then come back up here.
No se parece como un... Pero bueno, lo que la ropa la estoy analizando, que es lo importante. No tiene que ser idéntica. Pero oye.
It dips way underneath. And I'm going to work that out as I develop more of these other cylinders. So here's this one. This comes down this way. It turns the corner, or turns a corner. There's the cylinder lines. The material drops down this way and turns in. This turns around the body and goes in the other direction. And then we have a zigzag fold here, but basically what I'm going to do is turn it into two pipes that blend together right along in here. So now this pipe fold is coming down this way, and then the one right above it is actually much larger. See, it's kind of doing this. It's coming from way over here, then turning into a pipe fold, then turning into this pipe fold, and then turning into the rest of the material that's resting against.
Detalle importante.
chin, throat, neck. The ears somewhere right around in here.
Y este detalle también. La costura. De aquí.
Forehead, nose, where the mouth is going to go. Just so we have it in the picture space, it's kind of necessary. It's the one thing that helps us see proportions properly, so it does need to go in there. All right, so now we get into the bottom half of the shirt here. Here is a fold coming this way. There's two pipe folds that turn the corner like this, almost like lips. And then it goes back this way. That's the length of it, or the whatever you want to call it, the volume of it, extending off of the body. Then we get into the pants and such.
Vale, tenemos aquí esto.
We have all of this material pushing here and pushing here.
Lo agrupamos.
Again, designing the pipe folds, notice how both of these are spreading out and becoming the bigger bulk of the material. That's part of what I was explaining earlier in the smaller demonstrations, that your pipe folds have to pattern out or they have to spread back out into the bigger material, the body of the material. And so whenever you're finding that a fold is disappearing on you, it's actually doing that. It's terminating into the rest of the cloth. And down at the bottom of these two particular folds where they come around, it's going to create that eye of the fold. It's very, very light and very
algo de moda que se puede aplicar día a día, hombre.
Both of those pipe folds. I want to put that in there just to help recognize what's going on. This one turns around this way, so there's the rest
Tampoco solo el excéntrico, no, hombre.
Then when we get into the pant leg, we're going to be talking about lots of small shapes in that space.
Bueno, voy a poner
the folds are much smaller.
urban antes de fashion, porque si no.
Each one of these pipe folds, we're talking micro
Eso.
here.
Esto ya es cosa que se pone la gente.
2, 3, 4,
Repostureo.
5.
Madre mía.
And each one of these has
Este está guay.
curve, has its own perspective.
Vale. Me lo traigo aquí.
Of course, following the rest of them is the key here, making sure that they all work together in conjunction with one another. These spread out.
No sé, sí.
And there's
Puede
a
echar
bunch
un
of them in
ladito.
here. There's a whole series of them in here. Because the way the materials bunching together.
Lo voy a hacer en una capa
But
porque
you see now there's a pattern.
tampoco esto es una práctica, así que tampoco tiene mucho sentido andar con millones de capas. Utilizar muchas capas viene bien si se lo tienes que mandar, o sea, tienes que contrastarlo con alguien, te lo tienen que aprobar, bla, 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 bla. Entonces sí, tiene sentido, pero una práctica que de ti para ti tampoco tiene mucho sentido andar con tantas capas. No, que oye, quizá también, ¿no? Te sirve para analizar. No sé. ¿Vosotros qué pensáis? ¿Capas? ¿Todas las que dé? O menos capas.
Whether you're making something really simple or you're making something highly complex and rendered, we got you covered here. So just like everything else, all I'm doing at this point is I'm fulfilling all of these cylinder lines.
A ver, aquí están los hombros.
There's a few over in here that change direction, and these are important because, again, all these radiation points are the linkage that connects
viene por
one
encima del
cylinder
hombro,
to the next.
del
So without
hombro.
this angle here, we wouldn't be
En
able
todas
to
estas
jump
fuerzas.
into these angles up along the shoulder. And then those
Voy a
angles
dibujar un poco lo que no se ve.
like this, and then those go down like this and so forth. So there's a pattern that's happening all throughout the material. because again, the material is one unit surrounding the
la altura de
figure.
la
Whatever
barbilla.
happens on one side displaces the other
Esta
side.
rodilla
Right?
está a la altura de la
It doesn't
barbilla.
have additional
Después
volume
baja
elsewhere. It's all one volume. Now,
los
I'm going to do
taconazos.
this. This isn't something that I necessarily want you to do right now.
Y aquí la otra rodilla.
If you choose to do it, just make
Okay.
sure that it's on its own layer. And
Esto
it's
encaja
not
aquí, esto encaja aquí.
because I don't want distractions
Esto
from being
tiene
able to read your homework.
foreshortening,
Needs
es
to be
decir,
legible on its own,
que va un poco hacia la
without
cámara.
extra stuff clouding it up and making it hard to
Entonces,
work with.
esta pierna de aquí,
All right. So why all these pipes now? What's going on with this?
al no ir tan dirigida hacia la cámara,
When we
esta
start
sí va más
coloring
dirigida
some
hacia la cámara, esta se ve más larga
I'm actually gonna turn the
y esta
blending
mucho más
mode's
corta.
function into multiply so I can see what I'm
Porque
building underneath.
si os
The very
fijáis,
first
el
place we would
zapato
always begin
nos
with our
muestra
picture is the local value.
bastante
We want to start with local
suela,
values.
va un poco hacia nosotros.
Something that addresses the overall color content of the object that we're painting. Local value. This is not relatable to light. This is just based upon its own body color. Its own internal or physical colorization. Internal in this case means contained within its own object. Internalized there, not externalized in the atmosphere of things. Alright, and then new layer for the
Por aquí
shadows.
va esto,
And I could just basically keep the same value.
aquí hay un hombro
I don't
y
have
de
to
aquí
switch values.
cuelga
And then along
parte de
each
la
of these
capa
pipes now,
y de aquí cuelga otra parte de la capa.
the underside of
Me
this
borra un
one
poco de
comes
la
up
cara,
into a half
deja
tone,
sitio.
out into the light. The underside of this one stamps down into darkness. And that's basically what I'm doing with all of these. I'm going to the underside of every pipe fold that I've made, and I'm shading it down darker. The inside of all of this to the underside of the
oreja.
pipe fold along here is all
Y
one
pelo para acá.
one shady unit. It's all one shaded space. Shadow patterns along here. Shadow patterns within the half lock folds. Right?
Este pantalón es bastante rígido, por eso se levanta de esta manera y tiene pocos pliegues por donde dobla.
Messy, we just basically erase it out because it's on its own layer. And uniformly
Viene hacia
to the volume
acá.
that you're working within.
Así que la cintura... Me he equivocado bastante
And that's how you would shape
con el
the
lugar
picture. Well,
de la
mind
cintura.
you,
Espérate.
the first place that you
Esto
would
no va
actually
aquí, esto va aquí.
would be
Madre mía, sí que está doblado.
right. You want to make the cylinder
sea
forms.
que-
Here's the cylinder form of the arm.
Que tiene esto
This is
quizá
actually
más
wrapping
más
around
derechillo
like so.
y esto dobla hacia
The
acá.
darkness kind of ends on the side plane of the arm over there.
La pelvis está aquí y esto está súper comprimido. Me he hecho un 7, pues,
Top of the arm
como
is a bit
siempre,
lighter.
en la moda.
Underneath here has a little bit of a cast shadow to it. But so there's the cylinder form. of the arm.
Trabajando la
Then
incomodidad.
we go back
de-
to the body color and we begin specking out the shadow patterns. And when we do this, we don't need to make the shadow patterns
Vale.
even darker than they are already. They're blocking themselves in, or we're blocking them into the
Voy a
already
ponerme
existing
rojo para
form
analizar
of the arm. We're
la
just
forma
starting
de
to
la
pick it up
ropa.
and connect the dots together now.
Tenemos aquí.
And it
Voy a
makes
empezar
drawing and
por el pie
painting
porque es lo
so
menos
much
importante,
easier to
así
do
que bueno,
because there's
pues empieza por el
organization
pie.
now. I have a completely organized process for getting it all taken care of.
La idea es ir saltando de un sitio a otro.
Slightly
Vale,
lighter value
tenemos
along
ese
here.
pie,
Remember, I'm on a
que
multiply
tiene un poco
layer,
esa
so all I'm doing
forma.
is I'm
Tenemos este
embellishing
otro
the shadow patterns right on top of the
zapato
body color. Once I
que hace
know
una
my shadow
forma
patterns are working, I
tal
get to
que
the body
así.
color, all is well. All is well. This comes up this way. Gets a little bit darker in
La
here.
capa. Su filo
A little bit
corta
darker on the
aquí.
underside over here,
el pantalón se ahueca.
And that's how you shade it. So the shading sits right on top of everything else. And notice that the shading is not very dark yet. Well, we can always go in and we can add
Forma tridimensional.
well. The very last thing you would do, and if you've taken my figure construction class, then you've already done this process. The very last thing you do is look for either the color of this space right over here so that we can relinquish the line work, or a slightly lighter value to embellish the highlighted surfaces on the top, which are also going to destroy the line work, getting rid of the line work and burying it back into the fabric. And even our highlights are going to change in their brightness as they go from one spot to the other.
Esto hace así.
The same lightness all over.
Aquí tiene
As we're dropping into these shadows,
como el centro, pero el centro no está abierto, esto está cerrado. Y de aquí cruza hacia acá, porque de aquí cuelga un montón. De aquí, esta parte.
And that's an easy way of painting. You control your local tones, you control your
Aquí tenemos un pliegue grande. Aquí un pliegue más chico pero más largo. Esto se pierde la sombra. Y aquí ya sale la capa.
And that's what we do. So this step right here is a bonus step. I don't expect you to do this. In fact, I don't want to see this if it completely covers
Aquí
up
tenemos la otra
everything
mano.
we've done. So the next thing and the last thing here I want to show you is how you're going to turn this in. The way that I want you turning in your homework each week, you're going to turn it in on 2 sheets of paper or 2 files. Your first file is going to have 3 of your figures on it, like we have here. If you think about each row, this is figure 1, figure 2, and figure 3. And then on your second page, you're going to have 2 more. Here is what you're going to be doing each week. Each week, you're going to be doing 20 figures of this sort. You're then going to do a proof sheet to show me all 20 figures. Your proof sheet is basically this with all 20 of the figures that you did just drawn in one time. So drawn in one time means like this. If we turned off all of the white layers, you can kind of see the whole drawing done. Right? And this is what you would have 20 times on the page.
Y donde hay menos,
show me that you worked on this
menos apoyo,
20 times.
Se crean los pliegues.
Because we need the numbers. We need the numbers. And then you're going to turn in the 5 strongest on 2 separate pages. Each of those pages will be like this. On the page, you will have labeled over here figure A, down here figure B, down here figure C. And you're doing this so I can talk to you about which figures worked and which didn't, and we label them through the alphabetization scheme. And then at the very bottom of the page, you're going to turn in your name, week 1, Drapery class, and summer term 2016, whichever year it is that you're going to be doing it. Your call sign down in the bottom, your call out, is basically your name, the week we're in, which class it is, which term it is, and which year it is. This you're going to turn in. In addition to your page, this is how you're going to label your page. Across the top, this labeling is just for me. I've done this to tell you how to do this. You don't need those terms written down. It's very explanatory. I don't need to see this writing. But you are going to turn it in with the armature in the front, the wireframe that you've developed over the armature next, the line drawing over the wireframe, and then the final render. If you're doing these traditionally, all of these are going to be done on tracing paper. You scan each layer and then import them into Photoshop, overlap them so that they still line up together, and then separate them out for turning them in. Shoot once, obviously, with all the overlap so that you have your proof sheet done, right? The proof sheet figure, but then separate everything out for me. This is so I can see the steps and that I know you're taking the proper steps to getting something finished. When you draw something your own way and you take a class that's teaching you how to do it a correct way, there's all sorts of problems because you're confusing what I'm saying with what you know. You're confusing your terms with my terms, etc. This is to prove that you're basically trying to learn in this class something brand new, and that you can put your ego and all the tools that you have aside so that you can learn something brand new. Inject it into your work that you do and find a way to get it all to fit in. But the only way you're going to learn something is by doing it in the appropriate steps that have been given so that you can really truly develop something that you have never maybe done before. An understanding of what it is you're building and a language to go along with it. How great is that? You can actually explain yourself now. Woohoo! All right, so this is basically how you're going to turn everything in. It seems like a lot of work, but so is working. Working is a lot of work, and there's a lot of steps to each thing that you do when you go to work in a job. You don't just sit down at your chair, kind of flip on your computer, kind of paint a picture, and kind of turn it in. Everything that you do is documented in every job that you ever take on. Once you get used to working professionally, when you get into the professional arena, it doesn't feel like anything different. One of the biggest problems with schools is that it's not professional yet. And when you get into the professional arena, it tends to feel a little different than what school felt like. And we're going to give you the same treatment professionally in school here. We're going to have you do the same kind of workload, the same kind of call signs, turning everything in the way you need to, and going through the stages. It's a process. As soon as you get used to the process, you're professional for the most part because you're working in a way that the rest of us are. And by the time you get into the industry, there isn't any difference in the way you do things versus the way the industry does things. And that's the way we like to do it here at CGMA. Teach you how to be professional so that when you walk into that arena, you already know what you're doing. All right, everyone, take care. Good luck with your homework. Remember, you're doing 20 figures. You're turning in 5 to be graded, but you're also turning in your call sheet to show me that you did all 20 figures this week. Numbers count. If you only do 5 a week, you're not really going to learn very much. You have to actually do this in bulk. I'll explain that more in a Q&A later on. All right, everybody, take care. Have a great week and good luck with your homework. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to week 2. We're going to start with a review first. I want to start with covering the basics again, just to help you understand, because that's how we're going to be drawing everything for this remaining semester. And then we'll get started with the new information. So let's do a quick review on the information we learned last week. On the side of tools, we have pipes and we have triangles. Remember that everything that we build is based upon pipes and triangles when we draw them out. So any point that we capture here, bring it up to scale. Like this little fold we see, first of all, 2 different directions. And each of those directions disperses. In this case, the dispersion is tightening down. In many different cases, it actually flares out. That's the thicker materials. But in this case here, we tighten it down. One of these folds blends in with the other, and then the 2 of them together become one larger mass. So this is all one large pipe fold here, and these are 2 intersecting pipe folds right along in here. And we'll kind of do something like that so we can see the tension that we're building here. All right, and so in the interior of
Por
this,
acá,
the misleading
pliega,
factor
que hay pliegue
in the way that
grande.
I'm drawing this is that in this inner space between these two pipe folds, it actually goes back much farther. So there's a deeper crease between, and not actually right around in here, but back over in here, there's a deeper crease forming in between these two pipe folds.
Claro, el pliegue siempre crea
And then
sombra.
it settles into this body of material right along in here that's being stretched back and then pulled upward into the body. No less, the spaces in between the pipes are triangular, and the gathering of the material is in a pipe form, right? This is a continuous surface. This is a continuous surface, right? It keeps going and going. So that's the
La
design.
parte inferior
Between these two tools,
de la
we should be
pierna
able to note all of these things with regards to how we draw
la
them.
parte
The majority of
que
the
está
time,
colgando de
we
la
are
capa.
trying to design around something underneath.
Esta pierna se ha quedado en nada,
So if this cylinder is the leg,
Espérate
as
que
an
esto hay que
example, and our material
analizar.
sticks out
Ah, claro.
like this on both sides, when we draw any sort of fold over the surface of it, what we're trying to
Y aquí
do
falta
is
toda esta
embellish
parte.
the lines of these pipes to make them feel as though they're drifting over this surface. This is what we always want to try and do, unless we're looking at a 2D flat world like South Park, as an example, or even Steven Universe to some extent. Some of the characters in that are very flat. And if that's the case, then you still build upon the same concepts of triangles and points of tension and gathering points and such, but everything now has more of a flatness to it, because nothing here goes up and over in this respect or goes around in this respect. But that's for a completely different kind of design. The three different referenceable spaces that we are in search of, so that we can at least label them and understand what's going on. First, we have resting points. Anywhere the material is resting on the figure, all along in here, all up along here, these are all resting points. This is where the material is relaxed, but it also begins, in this case here, begins all of these different
Más o
pipe
menos un
folds
poco
that descend down.
apresurado, pero bueno. Ahí
Tension
está
points are like this
el
right here. This
estudio
is a
de
tension point.
de
A
esta ropa.
tension point is different than a resting point in that it moves, and when it moves,
Vamos a hacer otro
all of the
nuevo.
material moves along with it. Where along in here, when it's resting,
Así, ¿no?
what it's doing is it's gathering and it's draping across different objects. It does have direction because of the objects separated from one another, but it's not an active direction. It's not a direction that's
Vamos con este.
designed out of motion and movement. This is a tension point, and this is designed out of motion and movement. So even the gathering points on the back side all have this kind of energy to them that move forward or move in the direction of the tension point. Gathering points, we have a couple of them in this picture, here and back along in here. If there's a tension point here, all of the material is going to gather on the back side. You can see there's no material gathered along in here because the form is sort of bursting out from underneath, right? It's flattening out this space along in here. And
Las
all the
formas
material that should
principales.
be out here is now displaced and it's placed in the back. The same was happening along the top of both thighs. All of the material that should be up along these resting areas is falling off with gravity, and gravity is dropping it down below. All of these folds that are dropping below are gathering down in here, and when they gather, they overlap each other, and that's where all of the crazy triangular interactions occur. Because this is all one piece of material, it's folding itself upon the different reference points of your woof and your warp, the different directional threads in your material. So these are the different tool sets that we work with. And then remember again, going back to figure drawing, that if we begin with an armature, the armature is the basic skeleton of the human form, but a skeleton filled in, right? We're idealizing the skeleton by making it into bigger shapes. Rather than the arm being all these little knobs and sticks, rocks and sticks, we're actually making them into cylinder forms. And then if there is any advancing muscles that have their own profile or have a unique profile that we have to show off. Let's just say, for example, if we're talking about Greek myths, we have a Hercules type character, or if we're talking modern myths, we have Superman. And if we put Superman in baggy clothes, he doesn't look like he's strong. That's Clark Kent. If we put him in his cape and costume, then his muscles are the idealization of the human form, like
remangarse, ¿verdad?
And those muscles show off strength and power within the human body. So they become very symbolic and important. But if these curves cannot be seen, then it doesn't help create or help inform that message. And that's why the baggy clothes over Clark Kent. We have to disguise that facade. Although we definitely know that underneath the suit that man wears, there is a larger body because the suit is quite filled. It doesn't quite show off all of the cut lines of the muscles and so forth. It keeps all of that somewhat disguised, although in today's cuts and clothing, not as easily done as it was once before. But that cylinder form now, and then the angles that we might place over the top of it that represent muscles are the tension points, or the points of rest for the materials that we're going to place over the body. And then once we know that the body is designed the way we need it to be, then we go around and we search for the very first lines we search for are the cross contour lines, the circles that we draw through the form that helps us go up, around, and over things. And those are in the collars, the cuffs, the belt line, places of that sort where we definitely know we'll see circles on the body. That's where we place the circles. And those are the end points of the material. Then we build the cylinders off of that. And let's say, for example, on the back of the arm, the elbow is beginning to stick out and the shoulder is a resting point. So that means that all the material, if it's falling, is going to gather in the front. So I'm going to give the front of the arm a little bit more mass than the back of the arm. And I'm going to let the material on the back of the arm rest against the tricep, the deltoid, and the elbow. I definitely want the back of the arm to show the interior of the body. And then on the front, if there's any folds to be found, those are going to go around the cylinder form of the arm to show off its dimensionality. If the body is leaned forward, the same thing happens here. The shirt gets drawn out in front of the entire torso first, and then against the torso in the back if the person's leaning forward. And then from there we determine what's happening with the action of the arms. And the action of the arms does dictate how the body of the material is going to work. Let's say this arm is leaned outward or pulled away from the body like this. It's going to stretch the material down here at the armpit. This is a seam where there's stitching, and anywhere there's stitching, there's going to be tension as well. But also, this is where the arm cylinder separates from the torso cylinder. And the tension point between those two cylinders is such that it's going to cause a lot of disruption right along in here, as well as up along in here. Where under here, the arm is tightening up and stretching the material because the sleeve is short. Up here, the sleeve is gathering above the deltoid, and it's going to start rolling over the shoulder here. But rolling over with intention because this arm is thrusting forward. So these lines are also going to be supporting the action, the direction that the arm is moving in. So these are the basics. And these basics, once we have things identified and we build the cylinder forms, the next thing we go into is the rendering mode. We're going to look at the rendering next week. This week, we're just going to look at the wireframe and try and determine how to design it so that by next week we have no problem shading anything. We're also going to look at the 7 folds. We're going to break them down. This week we're going to look at 3 primary folds. Next week the 4 active folds. And what I mean by primary and active, you'll understand by the time we get done looking at everything. But primary folds come from a lot of this Greek toga and loose material wear. Where basically we just take a piece of cloth and drape it over the top of us. And the interactions on the body are very primitive and simple. Where in modern clothing, where we have shirts and pants and such, we have a tightening around the body, and that calls for a different type of fold structure because of the activity of the body. In both cases, the activity of the body is what determines the folds. But when the material is loose, like a drapery over the body, it behaves very differently, like a cape as well, than t-shirts, jeans,
Este brazo baja para acá, hacia el codo, que es otro punto de tensión. Aquí un punto de tensión, aquí otro punto de tensión. Y del punto de tensión del codo emana alguna arruguilla. Y aquí en la parte donde dobla, aquí giran unos cuantos pliegues. Y aquí, de aquí salen muchos pliegues. Aquí hay una parte más recta, porque aquí no hay tensión, en la manga no hay tensión ninguna. Y aquí tenemos, aquí no hay tensión. Esto de aquí es el otro brazo. Voy a ir saltando un poco para no perderme los detallitos. Aquí tenemos un poquito de arruga. No hay mucha arruga porque son pantalones un poco sueltos. Y aquí está el dobladillo. Aquí el otro pantalón enrollado con arrugas que van hacia la rodilla. Eso es lo que tenemos que entender en realidad, cómo funciona, porque llegado el momento tendremos que hacer dibujos con ropa que nos inventemos, y si conseguimos dominar un poco cómo funciona, es decir, pues, desde dónde vienen los pliegues, qué partes están sin pliegue, etcétera, etcétera, pues va a ser mucho más fácil. Nos será mucho más fácil dibujar algo que nos hemos inventado nosotros cuando hayamos hecho muchos dibujos de... Pues del natural mejor que de foto, porque tenemos que hacer la traducción del 3D al 2D, pero bueno, podemos trabajar con lo que tenemos. Tampoco es mala cosa dibujar de foto. Algo se trabaja.
So you can kind of see all these undulations, and he has drawn Josh Reed, this person down here, has drawn
a red
line around all of these pipes. You can see that it disappears around the corner, but down here you can also see that he is sort of ghosted in a circle, and that's exactly what you would do. Let's look at this in cross contour. So there's a small pipe fold in the back, and then this lurches forward and becomes a large pipe fold, and then it goes back and then becomes a less big, and then a almost double pipe fold, and then back to
más o menos. Tampoco estamos ahora con anatomía. Cuando sea el día de anatomía nos ponemos más en serio con la anatomía. Pero hoy, con que sirva, vale.
Is elliptical, and those ellipses are our pipes, and those pipes should be in perspective. Just like this photograph is in perspective. The photograph here has been shot somewhere around shoulder height. We don't see a lot of the shoulders. We can still see a little bit underneath the chin. We're not looking at an extravagant angle on the feet, so the camera is a little bit lower than head height or completely at head height. The camera is probably around shoulder height, but there's still perspective. So in these pipe folds here, these areas of the pipe fold are going to have a much less radical ellipse than down below, where the ellipses are going to be more visibly dimensional, or flat rather than dimensional, opened up instead of squished, if we don't know perspective yet. The ellipses down below are going to be more like this. The ellipses up above are going to be more like this. In all of these instances here, all of these different examples, the artists are trying to show that there's an architecture involved, and that's exactly what we do here with all of our draw-through methodology. Our draw-through methodology is to help develop architecture, both internally in our mind as well as physically on the paper. Internally, we need to understand it because as we're crafting shadows and halftones and we're putting details over the surface and so forth of an object that we're trying to draw, if we forget that we're in two-dimensional space on a flat surface, and yet we're trying to project something in 3D, we may forget to do this.
Ahora que hemos hecho esto, cambiamos a un negro.
Do it in a weird way where we don't really know if we're connecting with this at all or not.
Con este mismo
Trying to
pincel
make something of it. That's what can happen. And
vamos
in no
haciendo.
instance could this ever conform to the surface of this because it shares no properties with it. It's ambiguous, and I have no point of reference to begin connecting it to the other surface. But if I have these and this, there's my starting point. And now it's just a matter of extrusion. How high up, how far out from the surface of the original pipe do I want this extruded? And it makes things a lot easier for me to then develop, including when it's on a far side. When it's on a far side, I'm still following a track. So over here now is where I'm going to see the side of this block that I'm putting in, like a button. And then I need to see the same thing at the other end. Now I'm drawing very chunky here, but the line work that I'm doing is very specific, right? Somewhere on this pipe, a button exists. And I just need to make sure that this line somehow parallels with the pipe's surface. Somewhere back over here, further in, that same button exists. And we need to find the other part of it, especially if that part of it happens to breach the original shape that it's adhered to. Here's the original shape. Here's the extrusion on the far side. We now have connectivity with the buttons so that if there just so happens to be two of them, one on either side, we can now see the mirrored, reflective, identifiable relationship between the two buttons. This is the same way you can cheat airplane wings on an object and everything else. Fact is, form first, and we're trying to find this dimensionality. And the dimensionality comes in wireframes. So when we're draping something, when we're putting drapery on a physical figure, the physical figure must come first, right? So underneath here, we know that there is a torso, and that there are two legs. And these legs happen to be close to each other in this way because we can see that the heels are touching. So there is our stance. And then I'm going to draw a line down the middle to divide.
Es un material bastante rígido también, así que tampoco la costura sobresale un poco por aquí, sobresale un poco por acá, esto es la curva y este es el codo, o sea el hombro, y de aquí sí que cuelga la ropa. Agarrar la ropa hacia acá, y aquí se pliega de nuevo, envuelve el brazo, la ropa, y aquí otro punto de tensión, que es esta vez sí el codo.
And this is where all of the pipes are going to emanate from. So now
Aquí
we just
está más
basically
suelto.
find the pipes in straight lines for the moment.
Y
We find them in
tenemos
straight lines. And we can follow these
la
lines
manga.
in a path down the figure. That's very easy to do.
Llega hasta la rodilla,
And this is what we want in the beginning. We want
Pantalones.
simplicity. We want everything to be as simple as possible. We don't want
bastante
to make
estrechillo,
a big deal out of this because the harder this becomes,
llega
the less likely it is
detrás de la
that we're going to
rodilla.
try and solve any problem within this space.
Ups.
So now we put in the negatives and the positives. Here's a negative and here's a positive. The negative goes
Y aquí
this way,
tienen
the
su
positive goes this
dobladillo.
way. This material kind of drapes off this way, and this pipe fold overlaps everything else over there. So I could erase all of
De
this
la rodilla
information
cuelga.
here, which I'll go ahead and do using white paint.
Entonces tiene algunos
Just
pliegues
erasing it out
muy leves,
of
pero
the
que
space, and then erasing out
se
this ellipse.
dirigen a la
What we
rodilla.
should be left with is something
son leves porque
that relates to our
es un pantalón estrecho. Entonces no se ven mucho los pliegues.
And then I just basically need to draw that vertically upward. And then in here there's a small pipe fold. So in
Aquí hay un
reverse I'm going to draw this one
bolsillo.
out. And that starts to show off these 3 different pipe folds in
¿Qué
here,
otro
or 3 different
bolsillo?
pipe shapes that I'm working off of. Pipe number 1
Otro hombro.
here, pipe number 2 here, and pipe number 3 here. Those 3 pipes. Those go upward,
Aquí
and they go
pliego un
upward
montón.
determined by the most extruded part of the sides of the ellipse. This is sitting in front of the bigger ellipse behind it, which I can draw out. And then there's another ellipse over here, and those 2 ellipses join one another, so we find that place where they overlap, and that's how we map everything out down here. And then I find this, bring it up, and separate out these 2 channels from one another. All of this in between is darker in value. All along in here, this is the separation point between these several pipes. And then we have the same thing going on over here, all the way across the figure. Linearly speaking, this is how we lay it all out. As we get up here, the pipes flatten out because there's a tension point. So the pipes in cross section now are going to be something
hacia la
like
rodilla,
this.
¿ves?
Where
Las
down below,
arrugas van
they're going to be
hacia la
something
rodilla en
like
este
this.
caso.
They're going to have more fullness to their design. Where up here, because the stitching is tightening it down,
¡Ey!
these pipes are going to have
Lady
more of a
Urza.
corner to them
No.
along their shadow pattern.
Lady Urzúa.
Because this is
Gracias por
creasing
seguirme.
under, going to the tension point where it's stitched in to the belt line. There's still pipes, it's just that they change shape. The other way these pipes might be adhered is that they are stitched here and here. So there's a very deliberate place where the material is pleated.
También
That's
tiene
what
su
this is gonna do.
pliegue.
It's going to pleat the material or separate it out into smaller chunks. And then down below it drapes. So there's a pleating and then there's a draping occurring. But in between the two, that's basically the architectural structure of our pipe folds that are draping off of the waist of the body. So this is our very first fold here, the pipe fold. Oh yeah, one last thing. This word compression here. Compression is what's taking place up along in here.
Esta está
along
la
the belt line.
sombra.
This is all compressed.
La lengüeta
The material is tightening down at
también
one end,
pende y tiene
and then
pliegue.
it's going to open up at the other end. It's going to flare
sombra
out.
también.
Compression and then the flaring that's going to occur. And so that
algo
is basically
grande que me haya
just like over
dejado.
here. Tension
Esto.
and then, or compression up
Aquí.
here, and then this relaxed
Todo esto está bastante
feeling
en
down here, where the
sombra.
material has a lot more space to
Todo esto
occupy.
está bastante en sombra también.
There's a lot more space for the material to
Por aquí
occupy
abajo
down below than
también.
up above. That's also
Este
what
lado
draws
también.
attention to the
Por
design
aquí
of the dress. We can
también.
kind of see something like this occurring, where there's these really nice triangles that are sweeping down from the waist to the floor. And each triangle, as it gets tighter,
Estas.
has an elegance to it. Where with these,
Estos
you can kind of
pliegues de
see
aquí
when they
que
stay the
van
same thickness from
desde el
top to
codo
bottom, they're a bit more rugged looking. They
hacia
don't
acá, pero
have
son
the same
muy,
sheer
muy
elegance that
leves.
this does. But that's the difference between looking at curtains and then looking at a body underneath a dress. The curtains don't need to look as beautiful as the body that we're trying to accentuate, as well as but accentuate
Un momento.
with all of these
Árabe.
flourishes that are coming off.
¡Ey!
of those
Saludos a México.
show off
Árabe.
diminish
Cállate, chupa.
the volumes underneath, the smaller volumes underneath of the female form in this particular drawing. All right, so these are the pipe folds. We'll now move on to drop folds, which are virtually the same thing, but there are a few differences that I want to point out. The second of 7 folds we're going to look at here is the drop fold. Now the difference between a drop fold and a pipe fold. The famous artist course over here has one answer for
Era la
this,
cartera.
and then this over here in this tutorial has another answer, which I agree with both. So a drop fold is like a pipe fold in that it drops from a tension point and it relaxes at another end. Now, the way that the pipe fold drops, if the pipe is not clear, if it's more broken up into chunks that are less recognizable, then we can call this a
Vale.
drop fold, according to
Pues ya tenemos
what the
otro.
famous artist course determines
Vamos
a
a seguir
drop fold to be.
buscando inspiraciones.
However, for me, the answer to a drop fold is it what
A ver,
is
a
at the end of
ver.
how does it look? So a drop fold, as you can kind of see here, does not have a
Alguna
common
foto que tenga
baseline where all of the pipes
una
kind of
ropa
come to an end, much
interesante.
like curtains do, and much like elegant dresses of this sort do. Like this here does not look like. Now this cut of this dress, if we look at it in cross
Poquito de
sections,
hidratación
kind
mientras
of doing
tanto.
something like this. It isn't totally flat all the way across, but the relationship of each pipe fold has a flattened quality to it, where the difference between one and the other is not as extreme
Venga,
as
vamos.
when we look at these over here
Vamos,
on the
vamos,
right-hand
vamos.
side, where these are cascading downward. Each one of them has a
Las
very different
posecillas.
end point to
Getty
it.
images.
But each one of these is its own separate pipe fold, just compressed or flattened into one another. So that's a drop fold. So the two examples here, I believe, both share what we need to find in this type of fold. But each one of them explains a different.
Yo creo que tardaría menos entrando en mi Instagram que aquí.
We looked at both the end.
Lo que pasa es que no se pueden coger la foto.
And we looked at the way that the folds were kind of created. When the wind blows, sometimes we're going to have a fold that's a pipe fold like this, but only little sections of it are going to separate out and turn into two separate pipe folds. Only little sections of them.
¿De aquí cuál cojo? ¿El de la derecha o el de la izquierda?
And the way that wind does not travel uniformly in any one particular space for very long.
A ver qué piense.
At different speeds and different vortices, right?
Hombre, más interesante el de la izquierda, que tiene los pliegues del pantalón.
And that's what you're sort of seeing here. You're seeing these
rectángulo, esto lo cojo, lo borro,
and blowing the flag along.
Dios.
And then
Y
on the body, if we talk about drop folds like along here, it could very well again be on a windy day or a very light and irregular
me gusta este pincel, está muy chulo.
Tumbles and cascades down the figure.
Voy a poner
Or
más
it could
suavito.
also be a disheveled material that's been compressed and smashed together for a long period of time, in the same way that there's a difference between these words, wrinkles and folds. Wrinkles versus folds. Wrinkles, again, are the material that has been smashed into a smaller space, and because of that, the material now identifies the wooft and the warp of the material, or the fiber directions. And because the material has been smashed, it is now creasing along those fibers. And then when we have a larger fold that goes over that, it's going to be distressed in the same way that this surface looks, or even this surface looks, because the material is a bit disheveled and doesn't have that uniform feeling across the entire surface. So there is a difference between a wrinkle and a fold, and a drop fold can be one or the other. If you look at this material,
te voy a dar los detalles porque de todas formas no se está pareciendo.
These are wrinkles. All of these little bits and pieces on here are wrinkles. And you can see that if we are trying to find the pipe folds that do this, even along in here, it kind of breaks up and does this up here, but does something entirely different through here. Entirely different.
La forma general.
And
codo, o sea, los hombros.
It does this through here, so there's a pipe coming down this way, which means there's a greater indentation here and a greater indentation up here. So the wrinkling effect of this material, as well as the bunching, because this is probably being pushed upon by the gathering of material sitting underneath it. Both that and the wrinkles are causing distortions. If you look along this pipe's edge right along here, you can see all these little blistered areas where the wrinkles have cut into it. You can see here's where the beginning of a pipe fold is, and then this is the emanation point. As I was telling you before, on some surfaces, as a pipe fold is passing along, instead of tapering inward at the end, it's going to flare out. And it's just meeting all of the fibers where they would naturally be if the material is spread out. It's just trying to get back to that natural path. When they tighten up like this, the material is extremely fine. That's like a silk.
Tenemos control Z, y si lo hacemos con analógico tenemos goma, así que no hay que tener miedo a deshacer.
Materials do that. But anyway, getting back to this, The drop fold is all about the flare, and it is all about the distortion at the bottom as well as the distortion along the way. Not everything is going to have a clarity to it in the same way that a pipe fold does. Yet it still has characteristics of a pipe fold, and that's why sometimes I think the two can be a little confused, especially if we don't have a lot of proper training of identification. Again, though, this is the whole idea of doing a figure drawing
Curioso
series and or just learning how to draw
cómo está el encuadre de esto, que normalmente al encuadrar se dice que cortar. Aunque claro, este corte es más o menos limpio, pero normalmente cortar la punta de los dedos es no, ¿sabes? Cortar por las articulaciones, como en este corte que tiene en la muñeca, normalmente es un no. Pero la verdad es que la imagen no queda mal. O sea que las reglas están para conocerlas y luego saltárselas. Entonces tenemos aquí el hombro. De aquí penden, claro, es toda esta zona, así que de aquí pende este y estos dos.
These pleats that are in this material kind of have a noisiness to it. If this were nice and uniform and very simple and sharp in its shape, it would make this look disheveled. But the two materials together complement one another, and neither one of them look different from one another. Then when we get down into the pants, of course, we have much sharper lines. You can see the sharpness of the pockets and the sharpness of the folds have a much slicker architecture to them than everything up here, which is all uniform and goes together. The accenting of this works beautifully with this. They complement each other, in other words. This is going into fashion design a little bit and thinking about the properties of fashion design and how a fashion designer looks at the material, looks at the cut, looks at the type of cut that we're using, and then the model. And all of those things together create an art form. It's an art piece. And the artist is the clothing designer. The model is the armature in which the clothing hangs from, and the clothing is the design. The clothing is the art. But it's all thoughtfully placed together. We are going to be discussing many of these points along the way. When we're shading and we're painting, maybe at some point you might want to try rendering wrinkles, but for the majority of the time, I would say avoid wrinkles.
Hacia acá
Come back through here.
van las
Think
arrugas
of this material as
del
just being a
pliegue.
little bit more uniform.
Aquí está la
through and
costura,
through.
está la costura
Find the bigger architectural
y
components that
alrededor de la
make it
costura
what
hay
it is
pliegues en esta
visually.
dirección que van hacia la rodilla, claro, la rodilla está aquí fuera, pero van hacia la rodilla estos pliegues. Estos pliegues están causados por la tensión de la tela hacia la rodilla.
And then they both drop downward along the length of this particular pipe fold over here that is more influential
Aquí hay
than
un
this side
pliegue
because this side is
de esta
being
forma, se
distorted
abomba.
by what's underneath. But no less, once again, when we get into this and we start looking at it on a breakdown basis, when we start taking
Pliegues
things
hacia
apart,
el codo.
we can really see
Codo
that
que
there's a
está aquí,
simplicity to the
sobre la
architecture that's
pierna,
in here that otherwise we would
crea
never
esta tensión.
notice at all. And we would just assume that what we see is what
Y
we
aquí hay
see
tensión
and
hacia
we
la
would have no
rodilla,
label for it.
alrededor de la
And yet,
pierna.
as an artist, there's a labeling process that we have to go through in order for
Tenemos
us
aquí
to
arriba una costura,
develop it
otra
visually,
costura por
make it
aquí,
plausible for other people to believe in, and then at the same time
y todo está
characteristic
colgando
emotional so that our
del,
story can be told the way
del
it needs to
hombro.
be told. All right, so the difference again between a pipe fold and a drop fold. A pipe fold has a uniform bottom to it. The pipes are easy to
Utilizo el iPad con Procreate, pero también tengo mi tableta sin pantalla de pobre, una Intus, para cuando tengo que trabajar con el ordenador, porque a veces hay programas que, bueno, que no tienen todavía traducción en el iPad. O necesitas más pantalla o, bueno, de cosas en 3D. Pero sí, utilizo, ahora mismo estoy utilizando la iPad, que es bastante intuitivo. Es bastante cómodo de utilizar. A ver, voy a seguir analizando. Esta parte está un poco en sombra. Aquí tenemos un bolsillo. Aquí tenemos ojales. Y otro bolsillo plegado. Aquí un pliegue grande, que es importante. Claro, es que lo había dibujado. Vale. Este pliegue lo había dibujado aquí. El ojal va aquí.
Is ambiguous. That could mean any kind of fold. That could mean anything.
Que quizá
and we
va un
don't
poco más
want
para acá.
ambiguous labels here. We want very specific labels. And this one has a term that was coined back in the
tenemos este pliegue, tenemos este pliegue.
Started his teaching, which I don't know. That was around the turn of the century, 20th century.
Mi intención no es hacer una ilustración súper chula en base a esta foto de alguna fotógrafa o fotógrafo de moda, sino aprender analizándola para aplicarlo en mi propio diseño. ¿Quiere decir que estás en contra de hacer ilustraciones en base de fotos de gente? Hombre, para mí no me gusta. Yo no lo haría. No por un tema moral o de derechos de autor. Es que no me interesa. Esas imágenes ya están creadas. Me gustaría crear otras imágenes. Lo que me gusta es contar historias también. El cómic, etcétera. O ilustraciones que digan algo. Hacer una ilustración simplemente porque sea bonita, para mí no es interesante. Si para alguien es interesante, pues genial.
Those points are very specific tension points, and on some people, like myself, they're very prominent. And that becomes a measurable point.
Pero para mí no es tan interesante hacer reinterpretar una imagen fotográfica, no es tan interesante. Lo hago como ejercicio para aprender. Y si pudiera, o sea, si no estuviéramos confinados y pudiera estar haciendo esto en una cafetería, no lo estaría streameando, pero sería más interesante porque la gente se mueve, tienes tiempo limitado para hacer los apuntes y está muy guay, se aprende mucho dibujando del natural. O si tienes una terraza, claro, un lápiz y una hoja está perfecto. Es decir, todo lo que estoy haciendo yo aquí, mirando tu móvil y con el lápiz y el papel, puedes hacerlo igual. Una goma, vas borrando y vas analizando. Perfecto. Es una herramienta estupenda. Cuando empieces en digital, pues a tope con el digital. Si tienes ordenador, la forma más económica es una tableta sin pantalla. Necesita mucho entrenamiento, pero porque claro, tienes que estar mirando a la pantalla o al móvil, porque ya las hay que te sirve para dibujar en el móvil o en un tablet, mirando a la pantalla y dibujando en otra superficie, y eso necesita un cierto entrenamiento. Pero una vez que le coges el rollo, está genial. Yo es que la he liado porque me pillé el iPad y ahora el chip se me ha ido a dibujar donde estoy mirando. Y una vez que haces eso, ya volver atrás cuesta mucho trabajo. Pero como opción que te ofrece mucho por poco, una tableta sin pantalla es genial. Que lo que quieres es dibujar mucho. A ver. llevo como 2 años máximo dibujando, hago retratos. Pues, hombre, es verdad que un iPad es la leche para dibujar con lo que te ofrece, etcétera. O, bueno, un iPad o incluso una tableta apañadita con Android, que es más abierto, porque los de la manzanita a veces no veas. También está muy bien porque siempre tienes tu herramienta a mano, claro. Eso lo bueno que tiene trabajar con una tableta es que siempre tienes tu herramienta a mano. Como un cuaderno, ¿no? Que puedes llevar. Pero vamos, que también se puede dibujar en cuaderno. Yo, de hecho, muchas cosas las hago en un cuaderno de bocetos que tengo y después le hago una foto y me lo traigo al digital. ¿Por qué? Porque el cuaderno lo puedes llevar a cualquier lado. No me arriesgo a pegarle un golpe y cargarme algo bastante caro. El papel también tiene su punto. El digital es muy guay, pero oye, mola el papel, ¿eh? A ver, voy a analizar un poco los pliegues alrededor. De aquí cuelga.
It has a few slight diaper folds along in here. It has a diaper-like quality to it here. And yet, up here on the shoulders, it
al fin y al cabo, lo que utilices para dibujar siempre va a ser solo una herramienta. Y la herramienta nunca tiene que estar por encima del artista, ¿sabes? Tú eres el artista. Los conocimientos que tenga, eso sí que son los importantes. Conocimientos y la habilidad que tenga, lo que practique. Sí, tú sabes por qué es eso de que es más difícil dibujar mujeres. Porque dibujar hombres es más indulgente, es decir, los personajes femeninos tiene que estar todo mucho más pulido, mucho más... Cualquier imperfección se nota un montón. Aquí este muchacho que es tan guapo, yo lo he puesto y parece el monstruo de Frankenstein, pobrecito. Aún así se entiende como un retrato masculino que, bueno, si no lo ves al lado del otro, puede colar. Si haces eso con una mujer, es que a mí también me pasa. Si haces eso con una mujer, es como, ¿pero qué le pasa? No, eso no es una mujer. Entonces, todo es mucho más sutil, las líneas son mucho más sutiles, por como tenemos entrenado el ojo, no por otra cosa. Por la sociedad en la que vivimos, las líneas de los personajes femeninos tienen que ser mucho más suaves, tienen que estar mucho más pulidas, tienen que ser más perfectas. Porque, bueno, se le exige a las pobres mujeres. Joder, es que es increíble. En ese sentido, pues practicar hasta que vayan saliendo más. Pues eso, muchas veces es más sobre dejar elementos fuera, es decir, vamos a ver, voy a utilizar aquí una goma suave. Por ejemplo, yo suavizo, voy a borrar un poquito la cara de este muchacho e intentar mejorarla. Muchas veces se trata de hacer el dibujo con los elementos mucho más suavizados. Es decir, aquí tendría forma de la nariz, una pequeña sombrita, los morros, la nariz, el labio del muchacho, la sombra debajo de la boca, la barbilla. Se marca aquí que aquí hay bastante sombra.
And then we double the lines third, and we build into it a certain kind of volume that then helps us finalize or complete
con la expresión así hacia arriba. Ya con eso, más suave,
diaper fold is the same way here. We want to first find the tension points, then find the material that's
queda como un poco mejor. El pendiente, el pendiente, hombre, que es importante. Y a lo mejor aquí medio insinuado esta sombra de la frente. Pero todo mucho más suave. Y con los retratos de personajes femeninos, pues pasa un poco eso. Que tiene que estar todo súper caligráfico, súper en su sitio. Te vas un poquito de modelo y se nota una desjartada porque nuestros cerebros están pensados, o sea, nuestro cerebro dedica un montón de recursos a identificar caras. Y si algo no está bien en una cara, lo nota al momento. Si algo no está bien en un cuerpo, le cuesta un poquito más de trabajo identificarlo. Pero si algo está mal en la cara, madre mía, cómo lo nota de rápido. Increíble. Entonces, claro, anatomía del rostro y hacer mucho retrato. Cantidad. Y cuando hagan muchos retratos, pues cada vez salen mejor. Cada vez tienen más recursos interiorizados para hacer incluso retratos de personajes que te inventes. Porque eso se va quedando. Eso se te va quedando en tu arsenal de recursos dibujiles. Vas aprendiendo cosas y lo vas aplicando. A lápiz y en color no eres muy buena al mezclar. Bueno, paso a paso, llevas 2 años, ¿no? Dale caña al dibujo, domina bien tanto la línea como el volumen, como crear masas de... O sea, la línea que esté en su sitio y después el sombreado, analiza un poco de dónde viene la luz, dónde se ponen las sombras, etcétera, etcétera. Y una vez que tengas eso por la mano, te metes con el color. Poco a poco, si quieres también con lápices de color. Pues los lápices de color son maravillosos para trabajar. Con lápices de color se pueden trabajar un montón de cosas súper guay. Que no hace falta tener las cosas último modelo para dibujar. Con lo que tengas ahora, puedes trabajar perfectamente. Y puedes hacer cosas maravillosas. Y es cuestión de trabajar y analizarlo también. O sea, no solo dibujar y guardarlo en un cajón y decir, ¡ay, no me ha salido muy bien! Sino, bueno, si algo no te sale muy bien, lo analizas, ves por qué no ha salido bien, cómo se podría mejorar. Y de esa manera, poco a poco vas avanzando. Yo creo que este más o menos lo tenemos. Voy a marcarle con rojo las formas del tejido. Tenemos aquí esto por aquí dobla. Esta esquina está bastante interesante. Aquí hay un pliegue, otro pliegue, pliegues aquí, en esta dirección también. Estos multipliegues de la pierna son también muy interesantes. Aquí abajo no se ven, pero también están. Estos pliegues de aquí, de la pierna también. Este pliegue, esto que viene por arriba, esto que viene por abajo, este mega pliegue. Esta tela que está superpuesta también es muy interesante, que tiene aquí este pico y que dobla por aquí. Que si quisiéramos seguir refinando, al hacer esto, me estoy marcando un itinerario de cosas que retocar. Esto normalmente sería en otra capa, pero bueno, vamos a seguir avanzando. Esto tendría que ir así. Este pliegue es interesante, este pliegue de aquí es muy interesante. Esto baja aquí y este curva por acá. Todos los pliegues de este brazo no están suficientemente marcados. Aquí los pliegues de este brazo que viene hacia la cámara hay que marcarlos más. Y sí, esta curvita y este zigzag de aquí es bastante interesante. Ah, qué guay. Qué guay, qué guay. Pues no pares de practicar. Lo importante es que si tú te lo estás pasando bien dibujando, pues continuar. No desanimarte, y no te exijas tampoco mucho. Tú pásatelo bien, ve dibujando, ve aprendiendo y cada vez pues irás haciendo cosas más chulas. Seguro, vamos. Estoy segurísimo. No hay nadie que dibuje de forma constante, que no vaya avanzando y haciendo cosas más chulas cada vez. Eso siempre es así. Va a haber un intermedio de ladridos ahora. Ve por parte, ve por parte. De hombros para arriba, después, si quieres, céntrate en hacer una mano, céntrate en hacer la cabeza, un brazo, poco a poco. Ve, si es que intentar hacer y que quede bien una persona de cuerpo entero es muy complicado, porque una persona de cuerpo entero es súper compleja. Ve haciendo partes y después junta las partes. Voy a silenciar porque el perro va a ladrar y ahora vuelvo. This one over the thigh has the shape of the thigh to it. So I might have put the lines in where they need to go, but I might not have designed them appropriately in their orientation. And that still needs a conscious effort put into the design structure of it. So along the way now, I'm going to have all of these little pipe folds that explain the design that I'm going to render later on. And remember, this is all about the rendering, right? We're setting ourselves up for the rendering stage. So we're kind of showing off what we know about the forms. We're kind of showing off where we know things are supposed to be placed, so that later on we kind of show off that we know how to shade, because the lines and the shapes that we've designed sit right over the top of the figure and illuminate the forms underneath. In addition, each of their own forms are also in need of illumination. But in the end, it's mostly about showing off the human form underneath all of the material, and not so much a story about the material that's being worn.
Now the last thing here is that this fold along here is a pipe fold series.
Ya estoy
But
de
those
vuelta.
pipe folds have been sort of pushed into each other because they're flattening out on the body, and that's why
Se me
all of these
cortaba
cylinder forms might
chat.
look like they
Madre
have
mía.
little spikes to them or
Muy mal.
sharp triangles. But remember that when material folds and material is slightly heavier, it is going to create a corner. Those corners are called eyes. We're going to study those in one of the next design
Ponelo aquí.
lessons in the weeks to come. But those eyelets now create a sharper turn of the form. And the more acute the shapes are to each other, the sharper those folds are going to be as well.
De la cochina.
So now let's look at the way this is
No
supposed
puedes
to
tapar.
read. And remember, I'm going to have little bits and pieces and parts here. So just like the first week, the design that I show you should be complete. And I will have a complete
creo otro.
example posted up as an extra JPEG or PDF. But here are the stages that I want you to show me your work in.
Uy, ¿dónde va? Quédate
The
aquí.
layout should be broken down from armature
ver.
cuts to forms
Hay alguno
to
que se vea
all of it
bien.
together. And when we get to the rendering stage, we'll
Una
have a
camiseta.
fifth
Interesante.
separation in the way that we divide up all of the different layers that we built upon. And I'm having you do this so that I can see for a fact that you designed your armature and you thought it through, that it's going to be influential to the cloth that you put over the top of it. Then the cuts are to show me that
lo
you
que me
designed
interesa aquí
the
es
actual
esto.
cloth. And of course, because this
Invierto la
one has
selección
been
y lo
broken up
borro.
from an original drawing underneath there, some things have been tossed around a little bit. And I haven't finished this drawing either, so nothing really looks complete. But the cuts are the 2D stuff, and the forms are the 3D
Sí,
stuff. showing all the
el
pipe
Instagram,
folds.
si
Eventually,
sigues
you'll show me the
el...
renderings that
Ay, no he puesto el
the
enlace.
pipe folds
Es
influenced, and then
Dardro,
all
como
of
el,
it together
como el canal.
in the line
Igual,
form,
arroba
all
Dardro.
of it together in the rendering form, eventually. Right now, these are the 4 separations, and then give me
Ahí voy
5
subiendo las
figures,
movidas
5
que hago.
figures with this
Y también
breakdown to show
arroba
me
clase Dibu, que es
that you've done
el de la
all of the
escuela
stages properly, that I
de
know that
dibujo
you're
en
thinking
la que
about
imparto
this, because
clase
this is a
por las
process of
tardecitas.
thinking. If you don't do these stages the right way, you won't get the right results you're looking for.
Vamos
You
allá.
have to then fish around for them.
Y hace
And
primero
as you fish around for things, that's
con
when other
azul
things
un
get
poco la
messed up,
estructura.
get destroyed, ruined, erased, removed, whatever you want to call it. But things happen to the rest of the drawing if you're searching for something at the latent stages of it for other things that you just haven't solved yet. And in this process, everything is a step process. By the time we're done, we're done. There's no more need for adding anything new unless we're going to change the pose entirely. Then we have to discover all over.
Hasta el
All right.
hombro.
Good luck with your homework this week.
Los brazos van hacia atrás.
If there are any questions, hit me up in the forums, hit me up in email. But otherwise, remember that you're turning 5 of these in complete. And then in addition to that, you're showing me the page of all the other ones that you did during the week, adding them up to those numbers that we're looking for. 20 a week with 5 turned in with questions that you are looking for to be answered because of habits you're forming and problems you're solving that you may not know how to solve, or yet you still don't have an answer to, even though you were shown examples, videos, etc. You know, sometimes things just don't click until we actually do them. So, all right. Good luck with your homework, and I'll see you next week. Hello, week 3 of the Drapery class, and this week we're going to cover the other half of the 7 folds. We have 4 folds left to deal with. We're going to cover those. We're going to, again, work with the construction, and then the other aspect of this week is that we're going to start to think about the render as well. We're going to start looking at values. We're going to start looking at the surface and filling it with tone. So it's not just a line drawing. From this point forward, our drawings should have tone in them.
No hay alguna... Yo es que no sé cómo va en México el tema de las carreras y tal. No hay algún... Aquí se llama formación profesional. Algo más de artes aplicadas o algo por el estilo que puedas hacer antes. Porque yo, si volviera atrás y empezara mis
So the
estudios,
first of these folds is the half
3
lock.
horas de ida, qué
And the
locura.
half
Eso es
lock
como irme yo a
is a
estudiar a
combination of the
Granada.
upper
Que
and the
si, oye, si
lower
tienes
half
pasta
of a cylinder
para vivir
when they
fuera,
join
pues
together at the joints,
está
like
guay,
the
pero
shoulder, the
tienes que
elbow,
tenerla.
and if you have one
Pero
of those
por
glove
tu zona no
arms, you
hay
know,
eso,
where the
como
end of your cuff turns into a glove, then you might also have one in the
no sé cómo se
wrist.
llamará
You'll
allí,
have them behind the
pero
knees,
aquí se
you'll
llama
have them
formación
in the
profesional.
hips, and you might also have one every now and again in a shirt
Como
in your waist if the
eso,
shirt is really
artes
tight.
aplicadas o algo por el
And
estilo. Porque empezar por
there's a
ahí,
lot of
oye,
cinching going
puede estar
on
guay.
between the upper and
Después
the
de
lower
eso
half of the
puedes ya
body, like an
saltar a
extreme bend between
la
the
universidad de
ribcage
otra
and the
manera,
torso,
con
possibly.
un conocimiento
Anywhere,
más
though,
asentado.
there is a joint,
Yo eso
you're
lo veo
going to
guay.
have one of these form. And what it
Los
basically
estudios
happens here is
universitarios tienen
you
su
have material
punto, porque
above,
tienen su punto,
you
porque
have
están muy
material
guay.
below. Remember that when we're
Pero oye,
thinking
también
about all of this stuff, it comes
los
from a cylinder
conocimientos más
first, right?
técnicos
Everything that we have that we're wearing
no hay que
has a
despreciarlo.
cylinder-like
Está muy
quality
guay
to it.
también.
And so this cylinder, when there's a bend point halfway through it, the material has to, well, on the back side, it's going to tighten up.
Es hacia el,
So it's going to show off the forms.
hacia el
But on the
hueco
front side, you're going to have all this
del-
extra material. And
de
all
la
of this
axila
extra material that's starting
es hacia
to build
donde
up
van
in this
las,
space in this corner has to go somewhere. And
las
the more
arrugas
the
laterales
arm
de
bends,
de
the
la
more acute
camiseta.
the arm is to each
Y
other, to
después
one half and the
se
other.
posan aquí sobre la
The
cintura.
material will eventually overlap itself. So this material will end up a little bit higher, and this material will kind of get pulled right up underneath it, as this example over here shows. Here's from the back side, and you can see how the material is slipping underneath. Now, it doesn't always work that way. In some cases, the half lock will basically look
Bueno, voy a
like
dejarlo así.
this. When the material is a little bit heavier, sometimes, and when the material is tighter to the body,
Un poco más fino.
and there isn't as much slack that's going to pull away from it, the
Aquí
half lock
tenemos
won't necessarily
esto.
overlap in such a way where it
Esto viene para
overlaps
acá.
completely and envelops itself. Sometimes it's just going to run parallel to itself. But again, that's the thickness of the material or the weight of the material and the stiffness of it will determine, as well as how tight on the body it is. If it's really loose off of the body, then more than likely you'll have all sorts of overlap happening everywhere because of gravity and weight and so forth. This is also considered a half lock, and it's when the material is kind of tied over itself. So you take a towel that's straight like this, and then you twist it, or you twist this side, and then all of a sudden you have a towel that's like this, and then you bring the two ends together, and it's something like this, which is this example right here. That's also a half lock. Anytime the material folds over on itself, regardless of the kind of fold over,
2 horas también,
because when
madre
the
mía.
material folds over on itself, it's because of the
¿Qué
action
faena? ¿No
of what's
tienen nada
underneath.
cerca?
Because we're also talking about clothing, we're talking about enclosures.
La verdad es que
We're talking about clothing
la
that's
zona
bound to the body. So
que no tienen
whatever
ese tipo de cosillas
clothing
cerca,
is going
joder,
to
es que es
do,
una
the
faena,
action is
¿sabes?
going to show
Hay que
what's going
mover,
on underneath. With
desplazarse
this particular kind of
tantísimo
half lock,
pues,
it
para
is
estudiar,
almost
¿sabes?
like a decorative
Que
one.
no
You
es...
don't need the body to show off what this is going to be. You could drape this off of the shoulders. You could design your scarf, flipping it over,
espérate.
and how it has like a little bit of action to it. Towels, when you hang them up, they
Esta
can have a
orejilla,
fold over on that.
lo mismo hay
like
que
that.
echarle un poquito
But
para
it
atrás.
isn't necessarily caused by an internal
Me he
fold,
dado
but it's
cuenta.
still a half lock no less, because the material is folding over on itself. I hope all of that makes sense. Using that
Bueno, vamos a
term over
centrarnos
and
en la
over
ropa.
again, eventually it's like, fold over what?
Ropa.
Anyway, let me
Este hombro
remove
queda
all of these
aquí.
marks
Esto
over
viene por
here.
acá. Aquí
And we'll look at these Bridgman examples. This is George Bridgman
queda
here. You know him from the anatomy books. We
el
also did one
hueco
on Drapery, the anatomy of Drapery.
de los
So here
pectorales.
we have
Esto de aquí es
that
una
drop
sombra.
fold going like this,
Un
and in
despliegue.
between, on the other side of the
La
material,
sombra de la
over
barbilla.
here and over
Bueno, de
here
la
and
cabeza.
over here, you have these half locks. Now, when a half lock
Todo esto en
occurs, you
sombra.
basically end up with
Ta-ta.
corners. And if the material is really heavy, then in those corners
Y
you'll have
los
little
pliegues
corners
van.
like this. These
Pero es
little
que
corners are
tiene
called
las rayitas.
eyes. And the
Pero los
eye
pliegues
of the
van en esta
material
dirección.
is
Aquí a lo que vamos es a
tension
los
point
a cómo se comporta el tejido. Aquí van en esta dirección, aquí van en esta dirección, aquí van volviéndose en esta dirección. Aquí está el pliegue de la sila. Claro, pero ahí no hay formación artística en la universidad cercana, ¿no? Oye, que también puedes estudiar, si tú quieres estudiarte una carrera, puedes estudiarte una carrera de las que tienen, la que más te guste, de las que tienes cercanas, y no parar de dibujar. Y aún así vas a ser artista, ¿eh? O sea, que los artistas no deben pedir permiso para ser artistas. Ni te va a pedir nadie. O sea, si sabes hacer el trabajo artístico, nadie te va a pedir un título, creo yo. Vamos, yo no lo haría, ¿eh? Yo no te pediría un título de Bellas Artes para darte un trabajo relacionado con el diseño o con el arte, ¿eh? O sea, el título de Bellas Artes, pues yo entiendo que te puede hacer falta si vas a impartir en la universidad o en alguna institución, en algún colegio, instituto o lo que sea, clases de arte, para eso sí. Y para alguna cosilla más también, pero por lo demás no veo que montar tu formación por tu cuenta te haga ser menos artista. Yo no hice Bellas Artes, por ejemplo. Me quitaron las ganas porque en la zona donde vivo, que es Sevilla, decían que toda la formación era muy clásica en Bellas Artes, muy de santos, de dibujar santos, que si la imaginería religiosa estaba muy metida, que si no sé qué. Y me rayé y dije, mira, pues me voy para otro lado. Estudié cinematografía, estudié imagen. Y después, al cabo del tiempo, volví al mundo artístico. Vamos, artístico de dibujar. En línea, si tienes la posibilidad de estudiar en línea, perfecto. Hoy en día, fíjate. Que no es lo mismo, ¿no? Hay que valorar las cosas. Estudiar presencialmente también tiene su punto por la vida universitaria, porque conoces a gente y está guay, ¿no? Pero si va a ser demasiado difícil y te lo puedes resolver una formación online, pues para adelante. Para adelante con ella. ¿No?
But because we are designers, it's a good idea to understand how design works in not just the sense of drawing it, but in the sense of how the material properties work as well, because that is a big factor.
Volvemos a la misma operación. Con rojo voy a marcar las líneas del tejido que son interesantes. Tenemos todas estas de aquí arriba. Tenemos estas líneas de aquí. Voy a subirle un poquito de tamaño. Esta es muy importante. Todas estas líneas que hacen la forma del sujeto. Estas de aquí, estas de aquí. Es como una curvatura. Y esta de aquí también. Estas que cuelgan, todas estas pequeñitas, estas de aquí dan mucha forma también. Y estas de aquí atrás, súper importantes. porque hacen un solapamiento. De hecho, esta que sale aquí fuera también es muy interesante.
Where the leg is collapsing down upon itself, and if we draw that even further, then that is certainly going to be an overlapping fold if the leg is pushed back in that direction.
Claro, si es que es normal que quieras hacerlo en físico, es normal. Porque, claro, ¿por qué querrías hacerlo? O sea, ¿por qué preferirías hacerlo online? Cualquiera prefiere hacerlo presencial. Ahora, hay que valorar.
The next of the folds that we're going to look at here is the zigzag fold.
Hay que valorar
zigzag fold, we
si,
have a number
hasta qué punto te compensa.
points going on all the way through the form. Again, let's refer back to this cylinder
claro,
thing again.
Es una es más dinero, seguramente. En fin, mucha movida. Hay que valorar, como todo en la vida. Me había salido la cara súper ancha. Sí, más o menos estaría el estudio de este modelo. Me voy a centrar un poquito. A ver, ¿qué hora es? Ya. Muchas gracias. Pues ya voy a ir cortando por aquí. Mañana saltamos a otro tema. Hoy hemos trabajado un poco la ropa. Hemos hecho este. Hemos hecho este. Hemos hecho este. Hemos hecho a este muchacho. Hicimos también a esta que está cogiéndose el pelo. E hicimos a esta muchacha también. ¿Ves lo que decías tú? Que es mucho más difícil sacar a los personajes femeninos que a los masculinos. Pero bueno, son cosas que pasan. Mañana más. Voy a sacarlos todos a la vez. Mañana más. Un saludo. Hasta luego.